Only 9 people were in that gymnasium when it happened. 9 people. And for years, decades, not one of them spoke about it publicly. Not because they were told to stay quiet, not because of any contract or threat or deal made in a back room somewhere. They stayed silent because they genuinely weren't sure anyone would believe them. What they saw defied the vocabulary of combat. It defied physics the way they understood it. It defied the fundamental logic of what a human body is supposed to be capable of doing. One of those 9 witnesses, a former U.S. Marine named Dale Cranston, who had served 2 tours and trained under some of the most ruthless hand-to-hand combat instructors the military had ever produced, said this 40 years later in a private interview. "I've seen men fight my whole life. I've seen men die fighting. What I saw that afternoon wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration of something I don't have a word for." This is the story of that afternoon. Rewind. Los Angeles, 1967. The arena nobody talks about. The building had no sign on the door. It sat on a side street in Culver City, a squat concrete block gymnasium that smelled of old rubber and sweat so deeply embedded in the walls that it practically become structural. The kind of place that doesn't advertise. The kind of place you find only if someone who already knows about it decides, for whatever reason, that you deserve to know. The man who ran it was called Coach Vickers, Ray Vickers, ex-boxer, mid-30s, built like a truck that had been hit by another truck and somehow emerged angrier. He trained a handful of professional fighters over the years, nothing spectacular, nobody you'd recognize, but legitimate professionals who had stood in real rings and taken real punishment and still come home standing. Vickers ran what he called open mat sessions on Saturday afternoons, informal, no rules posted on any wall. The understanding was simple. You came, you trained, and if someone wanted to spar, you sparred. It was a proving ground, a pressure test, a place where serious people could find out, without ceremony or politics, exactly where they stood. Word had spread into certain circles, the film industry stunt community, the competition circuit, a network of private martial arts schools, that Vickers' gym on Saturday afternoons was where real talent occasionally revealed itself. And on one particular Saturday in the spring of 1967, real talent walked through that door wearing a plain gray t-shirt and carrying a gin bag. He didn't introduce himself. That was the first thing people noticed. Most newcomers announced themselves, at least a little. They carried that newcomer energy, the scanning eyes, the performance of casual confidence, the subtle positioning of the body to suggest they belonged. This man had none of that. He set his bag down near the far wall. He began stretching. His movements were unhurried and absolutely deliberate. Each extension held her exactly the right amount of time, each rotation controlled to the millimeter. The regulars noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit the visual logic of a space. He was compact, maybe 5'7", 5'8" at most, 135 pounds if you were being generous. Among the men in this gym, men who pressed 400 pounds and had forearms like industrial machinery, he looked honestly like someone's assistant who'd wandered in through the wrong door. One of Vickers' regular fighters, a man named Conrad Pulaski, watched the stranger stretch and said something to the man beside him that got a laugh. Conrad Pulaski was 26 years old. He stood 6'2". He weighed 227 pounds of what was by any objective standard extraordinary physical development. He had competed in boxing, in wrestling, and in the emerging world of full-contact karate. He had a jaw like a cinder block and hands that had shattered a pine board 11 inches thick at a regional tournament the previous autumn. He had never lost a sparring session in that gym. Not once. Not to anyone. He looked at the stranger stretching in the corner and he made a decision. The challenge. Pulaski walked over. He didn't do it aggressively, not overtly. He did it the way a large predator moves when it's not yet committed to action but wants to establish geography. He stopped a few feet away and crossed his arms. "You looking to spar, Ted?" he asked. The stranger glanced up from a stretch. His eyes were completely calm. Not the performed calm of someone suppressing nerves. Genuinely, structurally calm, like still water in a deep well. "Maybe," the stranger said. "I've got a few rounds open." Pulaski smiled. It was a friendly smile. It did not reach his eyes. "You look like you've got some background. What do you train?" "A little of everything," the stranger said. Pulaski smiled, widened slightly. A little of everything. That answer in this gym was a red flag or a joke. Nobody who was serious said that. You named your art. You named your lineage. You gave people the coordinates of your skill so they could calibrate. A little of everything was what people said when they were either dangerously good or dangerously deluded. Looking at the 135-pound man in the gray t-shirt, Pulaski made a comfortable assumption about which category applied. "Light contact," Pulaski offered. His tone was magnanimous, generous even. He was offering the small man an easy on-ramp. "Whatever's comfortable," the stranger said. And he smiled. Just barely. Just for a moment. Coach Vickers had been watching from across the gym. Later he said that was the moment he felt the first splinter of unease. Not the small man's stillness, not his size, just that smile. Like he knew something the rest of us didn't, Vickers said, and he was deciding whether to tell us or just show us.
The other 7 people in the gym were moving to the edges of the space now, unconsciously, the way crowds always arrange themselves when something is about to happen, as if the body understands the geometry of events before the mind does. Dale Cranston, the Marine, leaned against a wall and settled in to watch what he assumed would be 30 seconds of well-intentioned mismatch. Pulaski and the stranger moved to the center of the mat. Pulaski rolled his shoulders, settled into a stance, wide, heavy, the stance of a man who has learned through years of grinding experience that his body is a weapon and gravity is his ally. The stranger stood in a posture that looked, to everyone watching, almost casual, weighed slightly forward, hands loose, nothing about it telegraphed the danger. Pulaski looked at him. The stranger looked back. 3 seconds of absolute silence. The gym, which always hummed with ambient noise, the clank of equipment, the slap of rope on floor, the low murmur of conversation, had gone completely quiet without anyone deciding to make it so. Even the ventilation system seemed to pause. Pulaski moved first.
What 9 people saw. He came in with a jab. Fast. Legitimately fast. Pulaski's jab was the best thing he owned, the punch that set up everything else, and he threw it with genuine speed and commitment. It landed on nothing. The stranger was no longer where he had been. Not a step back, not a lean, a displacement. So small, so precise, it was as if the space itself had rearranged. The jab traveled through empty air, and Pulaski's weight committed forward by precisely the amount he'd intended, and no more. His expression didn't change. Good fighters recalibrate instantly. He brought the right hand. The stranger moved again. Same quality of movement, a fraction, a whisper. The right hand missed by margins that didn't make physical sense given the speed it was thrown at. Pulaski reset. His eyes had changed now. The comfortable assumption was gone. He feinted low and came high, a combination he'd used to drop 3 men in competition. The stranger read it before it launched. Cranston would say later he was certain of this, certain that the small man had read the sequence before Pulaski's body had committed to it, as if he could see the intention in the muscles before they fired. The combination touched nothing. And then, and this is where every account from the 9 witnesses aligns with eerie precision, everything changed direction. The stranger's left hand moved. Nobody saw it leave his side. Not the motion of departure, not the arc, not the wind-up or preparation or telegraphing that every human strike carries in some form. One moment his hand was loose at his side. The next moment it had connected with Pulaski's sternum at a point 6 inches below his chin. One strike. The sound it made was not a slap or a thud. It was something denser, shorter. A sound that seemed to originate inside Pulaski's chest rather than on the surface of it. 227 pounds of trained fighter sat down on the mat. Not fell, not stumbled. Sat down, the way a man sits when his legs have simply, quietly, and without discussion, decided they are done for the moment. Pulaski looked at the mat beneath him with the expression of a man trying to remember a word in a language he thought he knew fluently. 9 people, no words. Nobody in that gym spoke. This is the part of the story that gets emphasized every time one of the 9 tells it. Not what they saw, not the speed, not the physics of it, the silence. Because these were not civilians. These were fighters, trainers, former military, men who had seen violence in professional and real-world contexts, men who had watched good fighters get dropped by better fighters and processed it matter-of-factly within seconds. None of them could process this in seconds. Coach Vickers walked slowly to the center of the mat. He looked down at Pulaski, who was now breathing in a careful, deliberate way, not injured, but recalibrated, the way a machine sometimes needs a moment after an unexpected power surge. Then Vickers looked at the stranger. "Who are you?" he asked. And the stranger, this 135-pound man in a gray t-shirt who had just unmade the best fighter in the room so efficiently it barely looked like it had happened, picked up his water bottle, took a slow drink, and said a name. 2 words, a first name and a last name. And Vickers' face did something complicated. Recognition, disbelief, then a long, slow exhale, the breath of a man who had just understood retroactively everything he'd witnessed in the past 2 minutes. Dale Cranston pushed off the wall. He looked at Vickers. He looked at the small man. "That's Bruce Lee," Vickers said.
The name landed differently than any punch thrown that afternoon. It didn't travel loudly across the gym. Vickers had said it at normal volume, quiet, almost careful, as if he wasn't entirely sure the air deserved to carry it. But it reached every corner of that concrete room instantly, the way cold reaches you when a door opens in winter. Half-believed suddenly materializes in 3 dimensions in front of you, and you need a witness to confirm you aren't constructing the moment from wishful thinking. Conrad Pulaski was still on the mat. He wasn't hurt, that was the thing, and it was a strange thing, a disorienting thing, because being put on the floor of a gym usually came with a receipt: pain, a ringing skull, a jaw that kept the memory of impact for days. Pulaski felt none of that. He felt something harder to name, something closer to the sensation of reaching for a step in the dark and finding only air, the ground rushing up not with violence, but with the quiet, unarguable logic of gravity. His body had been spoken to in a language he did not know existed. He looked up at the man standing above him and said nothing for a long moment. Then, again. Not a challenge this time, 2 syllables completely stripped of ego, a student asking a question, a man standing at the edge of something enormous and leaning forward instead of back. Bruce Lee looked at him. That same stillness, that same quality of attention that several of the 9 witnesses would later describe independently, without comparing notes, across different decades, using almost identical language. They called it total presence, not focus, not concentration, not the locked-in stare of a competitor, something wider than that, something that made you feel uneasily, that he was perceiving the entire room simultaneously and had simply chosen, as a courtesy, to direct most of it toward you. He nodded once. Pulaski stood up. They went again. What nobody expected. This time, Bruce Lee didn't wait. He moved first, and the geometry of what happened next defied every expectation the room had constructed in the previous 3 minutes, because the first exchange had established a template in every watching mind: evasion, redirection, a single decisive strike, clean, surgical, done. What happened in the second round was something else entirely. It was a conversation. He let Pulaski throw. He moved inside it, not away from it, inside it, occupying the space a punch had just vacated with a timing so precise it should have been theoretically impossible, because the human nervous system is not supposed to operate at the speed required to make that calculation in real time. And then he showed Pulaski where the opening was. Not by exploiting it, by pointing to it, a tap, a touch, featherlight, at the exact anatomical location that a committed strike would have ended the exchange: left temple, right floating rib, the hinge of the jaw. He was teaching. In real time, at full speed, using Pulaski's own body as the curriculum. Dale Cranston would describe this moment 30 years later in that private interview, with a catch in his voice that had nothing to do with sentimentality and everything to do with the particular ache of having witnessed something you could never adequately explain to anyone who wasn't there. He could have hurt Conrad badly on any of 5 or 6 occasions in that second round, Cranston said. He chose not to. And the thing is, Conrad knew it. You could see him figure it out in real time. And instead of making Conrad feel small, it made him look harder. It made him want to understand. That's the thing about Bruce Lee that nobody in the movies ever got right. The man didn't make you feel beaten. He made you feel like you'd just seen something you needed to spend the rest of your life catching up to. The second round lasted 4 minutes. By the end of it, every person in that gym had drifted to the edge of the mat and stood there in a loose semicircle, watching with the specific quality of attention that human beings reserve for the very rare occasions when they understand they are present at something that will not come again. The room opens up. When it was over, Bruce Lee picked up his towel. He was breathing, you could see that. His chest moved. There was a light sheen across his forearms. He was human in all the technical senses. He had a body that consumed oxygen and produced heat like any other body in that room. But there was something about the rate at which he recovered, the speed at which his breathing normalized, the absolute absence of accumulated fatigue in his posture that sat wrong in the mind. The men watching had spent years calibrating their internal sense of what exertion looks like, what 4 minutes of full-speed sparring costs a body. Their instruments were well calibrated. His numbers didn't match. Coach Vickers brought him a water. They talked quietly for a few minutes near the far wall. What was said in that conversation stayed between them. Vickers never repeated it in full. What he did say, years later, was this. He told me something about why he trained the way he trained. He said fighting wasn't the point. He said the point was to remove everything that slowed you down, every habit, every assumption, every borrowed technique you'd accepted without interrogating it, until what was left was just truth, just what actually worked, stripped of everything that only worked in a specific context. He said most martial artists were building rooms. He was tearing walls down.
Vickers paused after sharing this. I've thought about that almost every day since, he said.
How 9 becomes legend. Word spread the way real things spread, imperfectly, slowly, through the specific channels that legitimate information uses when it doesn't want to be confused with noise. Not newspapers, not television, not the constructed myth-making machinery that would later build a different, more commercial version of Bruce Lee for mass consumption. It spread through gyms, through the stunt community, through the closed ecosystem of serious martial artists on the West Coast who knew each other through tournament circuits and shared instructors, and the occasional late-night phone call that started with, "You're not going to believe what I heard." The story changed in the telling, as stories do. By the time it reached certain ears in the competition circuit, Pulaski had become a former professional heavyweight champion. The gym had become a high-stakes underground tournament. The single exchange had become a full 10-round affair. Someone added a version where a second fighter jumped in and was dealt with in the same breath. But the core of it, the thing that survived every embellishment because it was the thing that needed no embellishment, stayed intact. A man nobody recognized walked into a room full of serious fighters. He didn't announce himself. He didn't perform. He stood quietly in a corner and waited.